Welcome back. For 12 years, Jeff Brandes served in the state legislature, where he developed a reputation for seeking solutions to complex problems that many of his colleagues shied away from. Term limits ended his time in Tallahassee, but Brandes, a Republican from the Tampa Bay area, formed a new think tank called Florida Policy Project to push for reforms and what he calls best practices to be implemented in Florida government. Now, I spoke to him about what he is hoping to achieve.
So my big takeaway after 12 years in Tallahassee is everything in Tallahassee is tactical. There is no strategy. And I can tell you that having, served in a variety of different roles, I can't tell you what the strategy was for property insurance. Couldn't tell you what the strategy was for housing affordability, criminal justice. I would say the only area that I felt like there was real strategy was education. And that was because Jeb Bush and Patricia Levesque started the Foundation for Florida's Future and focused on universal school choice as the overall strategy for what we wanted to accomplish. And so the Florida Policy Project is born out of that idea of you need an outside entity that's kind of pushing the best practices into the marketplace, into the policy world. And so what we do is we go out and contract and work with our professors from our tier 1 universities, and we ask them to come up with the answers to the question of what is the best practice in each one of those areas. And we break them down into sub pieces, and we've produced 9 pieces of policy reports so far. And our goal is to produce 1 piece of policy report every month.
And I know the initial emphasis was on the issue of affordability in Florida, which of course is a very complicated problem, one with no easy solutions. So it tends to be one of the reasons why the legislature and government doesn't tackle it, because there isn't a quick fix to it. But give me your summation as to what those reports say when it comes to the affordability issues and what may be able to be done about it.
Sure. So the bottom line is money from Tallahassee is part of the solution, but it's going to require the hard work of local governments to change zoning laws, to allow for accessory dwelling units, to consider smaller lot sizes. Ultimately, what the report says, it's a supply and demand problem, and you have to put on more supply of housing. And it's not just apartments like the Live Local Act kind of puts out there. It's more at the local level with smaller units, and frankly, just more available units in places where people want to live. This is not sending people out to the suburbs. This is saying, listen, we've got to do things more in the core of communities in order to ensure that there's housing at the middle level of housing available to everybody. I always think of housing as a pyramid. If you don't have enough housing at the top, they push out the people in the middle, and the people in the middle push out the people at the bottom. And so you really have to build at all levels. And that's really what our report highlights.
Now, obviously the legislature this past year, at the urging and the guidance of Senate President Kathleen Passidomo, she made that a priority, trying to pass some legislation with it. I think that there are some good elements in that bill, although I do think that there is some troubling elements, one of which is sort of that top-down approach where Tallahassee sort of circumvents the authority of local governments and takes away local government's ability to adapt. So right now there seems to be an issue where developers may be able to use the law that was passed to create really high density in residential neighborhoods that the local community may not want, but now may not be able to stop. That's the trick, right? The balancing act between the interests of the people versus what Tallahassee wants and what developers want.
Well, ultimately, I think the Live Local Act was much more focused on apartment complexes and apartment developments, and that's a piece of the pie. But the simple truth is the hard work has to be done at the city and county level to add more supply. And there's a few ways we can do that. We can allow for accessory dwelling units. People call them mother-in-law suites. We can allow for smaller lot sizes. We should be focused on upzoning to allow, instead of just single-family homes in neighborhoods, allowing duplexes or quads in those neighborhoods. Anything we can do to provide more supply. Listen, Florida faces 800 people a day moving to the state. That isn't slowing down, and we've got to have housing or people are just going to get priced out.
It seems like housing is one of the drivers that creates the high inflation rate that Florida now suffers from. I think our inflation rate in Florida is higher than the national average and maybe higher than just about any other state right now in terms of what we're doing. The governor would say that that's part of the success of people coming to Florida. You made mention of 800 folks a day coming into the state. But when you can't have a place for them to live, when insurance prices, and we'll talk about insurance more in a second, continues to increase, how do you combat that inflationary trend?
We're at a very strange time in Florida right now. Think about this. New home sales are actually cheaper. It's actually cheaper almost to go into a new home than it is to buy an existing home, which is something we really haven't seen for decades in Florida. At the end of the day, look, we've got to address supply. And if we don't address having enough supply, this demand is not going to change. This demand is coming. We know this demand is coming. We've got to provide more supply in places where people want to live. And that means the hard work has to be done at the city and county level. It needs to be supported by Tallahassee.
Give me your assessment now of where we are when it comes to property insurance, homeowners insurance, windstorm insurance. Where are we today in Florida?
Well, things have the seas have changed, right? So the legislature back in December passed through a major piece of legislation to deal with the litigation and tort reform. That went into effect in April of this year. And that's the challenge for people is everybody wants to see the immediate results. We've always said it's going to take 18 to 24 months past the legislature enacting the legislation and it going into effect for us to see real results. But I think we are seeing a lot of signs of life. We're starting to see the discussion about new companies forming. We're starting to see a lot of companies talking about taking policies out of Citizens. That's incredibly positive, and a direction we haven't seen in 3 or 4 years, frankly, because what you're seeing now is there's an opportunity now. Now, the challenge is most of your property insurers still have legacy lawsuits that will go on for 3 to 5 years for those companies. But I think you will see new entrants in the marketplace. And I think that overall is a net positive for the state. Unfortunately, it's going to be a rough 2023, probably a stable or stable 2024. And I think in 2025, you start seeing prices come down.
I realize that for the health of the market, the idea of having new companies come in, taking share away from Citizens is a good thing in the long term. But I also realize, and you and I both know, that what that usually means in the short term is for those people who are in Citizens, who will get taken out of Citizens by these new companies, are likely to see pretty substantial rate hikes because the legislature will allow those new companies to take over entrance into Citizens by also raising their rates. Talk to me about what you think homeowners can expect if they start getting taken out of Citizens.
Well, I think they should expect that rates are going to go up for them if they get taken out of Citizens. Understand Citizens rates are not based on actuarial math. They're based on a legislative kind of fiction where the legislature artificially years ago set their prices. And the new law that came into effect looks to rectify some of that. But what you have to do is recognize that you've got to get these policies out of Citizens. There can be no private market if Citizens is undercutting the private market by 40-50% and frankly subsidizing the risk to the rest of Floridians who are going to pay for that if there's a storm.
It seems that in the legislature, there are often a lot of reports written. There are commissions founded. There are groups that come together, and study an issue and then present it. And then so often those reports just sort of get tucked into a drawer somewhere, in part because of term limits and new speaker or a new Senate president comes in with a different set of priorities. And so everything gets shifted. What's going to be different with the way you're approaching this in terms of how do you take the work that you are creating in terms of these policy papers and then get an audience to actually listen to and enact some of the recommendations?
Oftentimes when you see in Tallahassee from different think tanks, they become hired guns. They'll give you the answer that you want if you pay for the report. That's not what our goal is. Our goal is just identifying best practices. And so when legislators have questions about what is the answers to some of these challenging problems, they have one place to go. They don't have to go sort through 10 different think tanks to think about it. Two, we write our reports for legislators. They're short. They're 5 to 7 pages, and we link to the larger ones down the road. And then we're using policy experts largely based in Florida. We're using our public universities and our public researchers to do that work. The other thing is, listen, we ask the questions, but the professors and the experts come up with the answers. That's our pathway forward here. That we've also focused on just 4 policy areas, really. Criminal justice, property insurance, transportation, and housing are the 4 kind of pillars that we're building off of. Ultimately, we think multiple reports on those areas, which are some of the most challenging in the state, are going to attract attention. And finally, I was a legislator for 12 years. I know what works and what doesn't. Listen, we're not going to take on sentencing reform as part of criminal justice under a DeSantis administration. But you are going to see reports on reentry, on elderly in prison, and veterans in prison. Those are coming out in the next month or so. And so, it's kind of using that political knowledge of gained over 12 years, the recognition that most legislators don't know where to turn. And if we can be that repository of best ideas produced not by Jeff Brandis, but by experts in the field, then I think there's something of value. And frankly, that's what they're telling me as well.